In other words, chemtrails are totally fake, and we're really glad we have them. They don't exist. It's a good thing they do. And you shouldn't criticize them. So this convinced me that one headline, and the story goes on to say anyone who asks about chemtrails or criticizes them, they don't exist. But if you criticize them, then you're sowing distrust in government. So then I'm like, I got to find out more about chemtrails. So let's just start at the beginning. I would say you are one of the world's experts on chemtrails. And let me also say that you have done the most compelling kind of research I think that a person can do, which is you have used publicly available information to piece together the story, the explanation for what we're seeing. Is that correct?
I have solved the unsolvable puzzle.
Using publicly available information.
Only the best sources, Tucker.
But you've used government sources to figure out what the government's doing.
In their own words.
In their own words. Okay, mostly. So there's something about that I love, because you're not saying I met a guy in a parking garage at 3 a.m. who gave me a manila envelope full of the truth. You're like, I just went on their website and read it.
Well, yeah, I did a lot of deep research. I had access to all the libraries of Northern California UC schools, or actually there's this book depository called the Northern Regional Library Facility, NRLF, and they are the book depository for all of the Northern California UC schools, including UC Berkeley, which was involved in the original Manhattan Project, and they had pretty much everything. And then I also had access to the libraries on the campus of UC Berkeley, and then I also did upwards of 100 interlibrary loans, if the audience knows what those are.
Yes.
I read hundreds of books. I made thousands of photocopies. Took me about 10 years and $10,000, and I compiled everything to the best of my ability. I do believe I have all of the most pertinent publicly available information pertaining to this second-generation weather modification project I call the New Manhattan Project in my book, Chemtrails Exposed, the New Manhattan Project, to be released by Skyhorse in January of next year.
Skyhorse, the last truly independent publishing house in English, I think, in the world. Really brave. Tony Lyons runs it. Amazing.
They're the best. They were my only choice.
I think they're really everyone's only choice at this point, but it's a great choice. Anyway, okay, so that's your story. That's where this information comes from. This information comes from government sources that you, I don't know, uniquely, but one of the very few people at least, to actually take the time to read. Like, what are these things in the sky? And you have spent a decade figuring it out. So, can I summarize something you said to me off camera that I think is really relevant? You said, you see these trails in the sky, and they tell you that that's just condensation, but the trails extend the length of the horizon, and condensation does not do that.
Correct.
These are particulate matter. They're solids in that gas.
They're writing evidence of their crimes in the sky.
In the sky. And so, okay, so let's start big picture. What is this?
It is a second-generation weather modification project that employs the use of sprayed particulates. This is what we can see, but what we don't see is the other part of it, which is the use of electromagnetic energy to manipulate those sprayed particles. And with this binary weapon system, they can attain comprehensive weather control. Not only can they control the flow of atmospheric moisture and the creation and the dissipation of storms, employing the electromagnetic energy, they can cause extreme weather, such as earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, and the like.
Well, that's a pretty serious claim.
It's all in the patents, mostly in what we call the HARP patents.
What is a HARP patent?
Well, HARP is an acronym for a facility in Alaska known as the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project. This is what's known as an ionospheric heater. There's about 20 or 30 of these things around the world, but HAARP is the most famous one. It was the first big, powerful one. There's been at least one other that has surpassed HAARP in power, but at the time that HAARP became operational, around that time, 12 patents, U.S. patents, were issued mostly to this one group called APTI International. This is a division of ARCO. It stands for ARCO Power Technologies International. And these patents outline what this HAARP antenna can do. And a lot of it has to do with weather modification.
So, again, staying big picture, the point of weather, you said this is second generation. So the first generation, the idea was, this is immediately post-Second World War, everyone knows this, was, hey, we can seed the clouds with dry ice or various things and cause more rain. And western half of the country needs more rain generally. And then it evolved to, well, actually, we can mitigate lightning and hail and lessen crop damage to some extent. Mm-hmm. That's all public. That's widely known.
Yes.
State legislatures vote on that. That's not a conspiracy theory.
No.
The second generation of weather modification has got to be, I'm just guessing here, related at least in part to global warming, right? To climate?
Well, yeah, that's the excuse given for what the establishment calls chemtrails. They call what we call chemtrails, they call geoengineering, specifically SRM geoengineering, solar radiation management geoengineering, and it's been given different names over time in attempts to muddy the waters. But they
can you just pause and explain what that is? Solar management. What does that mean?
Solar radiation management geoengineering. The thesis is that there's a group of people that call themselves geoengineers, and they engage in this. They say they're just doing modeling and things, but their basic thesis is that we might have to spray you if global warming gets really bad, because we can spray things out of planes, and that will cause cloudiness, artificially created cloudiness, which can reflect sunlight back into space. Of course, this ignores the fact that clouds actually hold heat in, and they make, clouds cause temperatures down here where we breathe the air in the troposphere. Clouds cause temperatures to rise, not fall.
Right.
So, their whole
almost
thesis,
like a greenhouse gas effect.
Yes, water is the biggest, by far the biggest greenhouse gas. H2 of it, water vapor.
Yes,
is by far the biggest greenhouse gas.
So, yeah, thank you for saying that. That's so obviously true. Is what you just said publicly known? I mean, that's not a conspiracy.
Oh yeah,
theory.
They go on and on about it. They've been saying this for decades. That we might have to spray you. This is a last ditch kind of thing, and lately, their latest thing has been like, well, it's getting really bad. I mean, we're just on the verge of actually doing it, while the program is going on. They're just obfuscating things and lying.
Who is they?
Basically.
So who?
The geoengineers. The
geoengineers working for the U.S. government. Well,
they not necessarily. I mean, they're in and out of government. They teach geoengineering at pretty much all major scientific institutions of learning. Harvard has a whole department dedicated to geoengineering, and there's other aspects of geoengineering as well that aren't as well known, such as ocean fertilization and things where they're talking about dumping iron filings into the ocean to stop acidification or some crazy thing. But these are lesser known and lesser taught ideas.
Geoengineering, that's like engineering the earth.
Yeah. And this goes back to Manhattan Project scientists who, right after the bomb was dropped in 1945, started advocating for something called planetary engineering. And the big, which is synonymous with today's geoengineering. And the big advocate for that was Glenn Seaborg, the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission. And, this is a guy that contributed 9 elements to the periodic table. He had ideas about planetary engineering. They were talking about, at the time, we can use atomic bombs to reshape landscapes and, do different things in reshaping the surface of the earth in order to achieve different objectives. Edward Teller, the famous Manhattan Project scientist, he spoke many times about detonating atomic bombs in the atmosphere as a way to modify the weather. And I really think...
Come on.
No, he did that many times, and it's written in his book, The Legacy of Hiroshima. And, I mean, the guy was pretty nutty. I mean, we all know that.
Well, we don't all know that, actually. Most people know nothing about this, and I would probably be in that category. But it seems like the theme here is once Hiroshima and Nagasaki were leveled, there were people in the Western scientific community who believed they were God at that point.
Yeah.
And you can reshape the planet, like you're in control of the Earth itself.
Yeah.
You're not just this tiny little speck on the Earth with a limited lifespan. You're like in charge.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was awe-inspiring. I mean, to this day, I've always been awed by that. I mean, just the terrible power of that. And, I've read the final chapter in Richard Rhodes's book, The Making of the Atomic Bomb. It's one of the most horrific things I've ever read, where he goes into detail as to, what happened on the ground in Hiroshima when the bomb went off. And, but nations around the world, people in world power structures, they saw that happen and they said to themselves, give me some of that. You know what I mean? People who love power, they realize that raw power, the power to destroy, should never be underestimated. I mean, that's the purpose of all militaries ever, right? Is the power to destroy the enemy, or that's the purpose of a military. Like the Army says, our purpose is to break stuff, and so when you see you can just fly a plane over something and drop something out of it and cause just like the most terrible destruction you've ever seen in your life. Power junkies want that. And so when that happened, all these former Manhattan Project scientists were placed pretty much at the top of world power. They were the people that everybody else was trying to get to. And so they were thinking big. And so we have seen the sequel to their original effort, the original Manhattan Project, and the sequel is, in my estimation, about 100 times bigger than the original, and I think that's a pretty conservative estimate.
So the mindset was created in the glow of Hiroshima.
Yes.
Look at the power we have. We are gods. I think they said that really out loud at the time. Yeah.
My most popular article was something that it was all about a certain Fortune magazine article that came out in 1955, penned by John von Neumann, the famous Manhattan Project scientist. It was called "Can We Survive Technology?" He not only inserts the theory of man-made global warming into the popular culture for the first time. It had only been relegated to academia before that article came out in 1955. No one had really heard of it. That was the first mention of the theory of man-made global warming made in the popular culture, 1955, John von Neumann. But not only was that in that article, he also has the first mention of this SRM geoengineering thesis, where we might spray things out of planes in order to reflect sunlight back into space and save us from this global warming. So this was a very significant article. And that article was about giving the green light to the military-industrial complex. You see, he gave us the problem. The problem is global warming. And he also gave us the solution.
70 years ago.
My math ain't that great, but sounds about right. Yeah.
So this has been going on for how long?
Well, the evidence indicates that the large-scale domestic spraying operations began in the mid-90s. Some people say 1995. I say 1996. And we say this, or at least I say this, because of a 2004 book by a guy by the name of William Thomas. It's called Chemtrails Confirmed. And he did a lot of good old-fashioned legwork journalism, going around interviewing people and finding all these people who had experienced these planes that would just appear all of a sudden, like, people who had been in the Air Force and whatnot, they were retired. And I remember there's one story in there. There's plenty of instances of this and plenty of firsthand accounts of this, where in one story, the woman says she was just making coffee one morning and all of a sudden all these jets appear. There's like 20 jets all of a sudden. She's in like some rural area of the northeast. It might have even been Maine. And she says all these jets just suddenly appear and they're flying over, leaving these long trails, and they make big grid patterns and stuff. And so they knew immediately that we're under attack. And they started notifying, local like FAA people and whoever they could talk to about this. And, of course they got nowhere with any of that, but they said, it was crazy. Like, we're being sprayed. I mean, we know that planes are not supposed to do that. I mean, how dare they? Like, what is this? Is this an invasion? And there's lots of stories like that. We have documentation of emergency rooms filling up after first exposures to these large-scale domestic spraying operations. When they first started, an area would be sprayed and immediately people would be coming down with nasty colds and flus and things, and the emergency rooms would just be, the waiting rooms would just be filled up with all kinds of people experiencing terrible symptoms. Can I stop
you there? That is kind of the hole in your theory. If this started in the mid-1990s, spraying chemicals over the United States, over the population of the United States, you would see a precipitous decline in the public health over the last 30 years. Not really. I'm just joking. I mean, I don't know if anything you're saying is true. But we have seen a precipitous decline in the public health since the mid-1990s, period.
I can give you hard data on that.
Please.
The CDC reports a 40% increase in Alzheimer's disease since the beginning of the spraying operations. And I believe it was I think it was 44% or 40% increase in Alzheimer's and then a 30% increase in Parkinson's. And both of these diseases have been strongly correlated not only with the inhalation of particulate matter, but with the inhalation of the specific substance that we are being sprayed with, which has been determined as coal fly ash.
What is coal fly ash?
It is the ash that rises from burning coal. It is a toxic waste byproduct of the coal-fired power plant industry. And before it was collected by these machines called electrostatic precipitators, it used to just bellow out of the smokestacks of coal-fired power plants. Right. And so this is how we know what the health effects are of this substance, because a lot of studies were done. People said to themselves, hey, you got these giant plumes of stuff coming out of the coal-fired power plant here, and it's, going over my crop and my kids and my family. Like, don't you think that's doing something to us?
Yeah, causing acid rain. Remember acid rain?
Yeah, so there's been plenty of environmental studies and health impact studies pertaining to that. So you can just apply those studies to what's going on now, because the chemical signature of coal fly ash has been determined by a world-famous PhD scientist by the name of Marvin Herndon, who has, along with a sitting director of health at the Monroe County Department of Public Health in Florida, these two co-authors, the guy from Florida, his name is Dr. Mark Whiteside, Dr. Herndon and Dr. Whiteside, they've published 28 peer-reviewed journal articles outlining the catastrophic public health effects of coal fly ash, as well as the devastating effects that these dispersions of coal fly ash has had upon bee populations, insect populations, birds, as well as bats, and as well as horrible implications for plant life. Plants are being decimated by this. I can see around here, around your location, your forests are dying just like they're dying all throughout America. I've never seen so many dead trees. This is because forests and all plant life are being subjected to toxic precipitation, which toxifies the soil. And especially in California, this has a desiccating effect on everything. It dries everything out. And then also, maybe the most important one is the UV, the UVB and the UVC, because these sprayed particulates sprayed in the lower stratosphere, are destroying the ozone layer. and they're allowing harmful ultraviolet radiation to strike the earth. And this is also the cause of the wildfires in California.
Okay, so so you've made everything that you have described is happening. There's been a collapse in the bee population, which is a problem if you want pollinated plants. There's been almost elimination of bats in the Northeast for sure. It's been attributed to something called white nose disease.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's a huge problem, I would say. And of course, the forests, we've had huge problems with forests that nobody seems to notice because nobody goes outside because they're all looking at porn or whatever. But that's real. Everything is real. Leaving aside, like, who is responsible for it and their motive, can we verify that it's happening? I mean, it seems like it'd be pretty easy to take soil samples, for example.
Yes, they have been taken.
Okay, so we can determine that there's coal fly ash.
The chemical signature, correct.
Where? Everywhere?
Everywhere. All of the environmental samples that Dr. Herndon has taken from or received in America and throughout the world have shown the chemical signature of coal fly ash.
Now, could we say, well, that's just from coal-fired power plants?
No, at least absolutely not in America. Maybe in certain locations where there's still coal fly ash billowing out of the smokestacks, such as in China. But that doesn't make it over to America. It rains out and falls down before it crosses the Pacific Ocean. In America and in Europe, we've had electrostatic precipitators removing that coal fly ash from the emissions of coal-fired power plants for Scrubbers, exactly. For as long as I've been alive, I think. I never saw it in my youth. I never saw smoke billowing out of a power plant. So these things were developed around the 1900. I think in the early 1900s by a guy by the name, I have a lot of information in the book about this guy by the name of Frederick Cottrell, who was instrumental in bringing this forward. Another European scientist, Sir Oliver Lodge, was also involved. But here in America, it was Frederick Cottrell, who was actually from the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, such as I am. He was a professor at UC Berkeley, and he devised these modern, of course, they've improved upon the designs since then, but he basically devised the original electrostatic precipitators that were used not only to sequester coal fly ash, but many other industrial pollutants. Because, industrial pollution was a big problem back then. For, coal fly ash, the power plants were probably the main offenders. But, pretty much every factory was billowing smoke out into the air that people had to breathe. So it was really a good thing that he came up with these devices that could intercept these industrial pollutants. But, yeah.
But you're saying this as soon as science caught up to the problem of, like, what do you do with the emissions from these coal plants? It creates this great thing called electricity, but there's a huge downside. It's like poisoning the earth. And that was, of course, completely real.
Yeah.
That was the real environmental crisis, unlike climate change. Mm-hmm. As soon as science figured out how to take them out of the emissions, then they started putting them back up into the sky again. Yeah,
I mean, it kind of looks to me like what my gut tells me it was some kind of revenge. I mean, apparently it works, but if you're the establishment, such as the Rockefellers, creating these situations where you have these industrial plants spewing all this stuff out into the atmosphere, and then this guy comes along and there's all these citizens filing lawsuits about it, and then this guy invents this machine that you have to spend all this money on, and you get beaten in the courts over the lawsuits and everything. You're kind of pissed off, if I can use this kind of language on your show. You're kind of angry about it, if you're because I know how these elites think, these peons, they're causing us to put out all this money over the fact that we're, polluting their farms and, ruining their health. Who cares about them? We're trying to make money here. Well, there's clearly that attitude's, in evidence all around us. Yeah. In your research, did you ever find any document that said, yes, somebody is spraying coal fly ash into the air, into the atmosphere? Well, yeah. 28 peer-reviewed journal articles by world-famous PhD and the sitting director of Monroe County, Florida Department of Health.
And did they indicate who was behind this? Was it an agency of the U.S. government?
That's not really their part. These are men of science who have provided us with a crucial piece to the puzzle. That would really be up my alley, because I'm the guy who's gone back and done all the research, what we call the science history of this whole thing. And, the other guy, it's really, I think, trying not to sound egotistical, I'm really not, but, I think Dane Wigington has come forward with a lot of really important scientific data and information on this. Marvin Herndon, Dr. Whiteside, and then I fill in the other part of it. I think between us four, I think we've provided the most compelling information pertaining to all of this. I come through with the science history. I fill in the backstory as to why this is happening. Dane, God bless him, he's done a tremendous job. I absolutely respect and admire his work. He's addressing the most pressing issues of all of this, which are the environmental issues. And he has very extensive scientific knowledge. And like I say, I'm not a science guy. So, he's coming, and this is why his work has been is so popular. And my work is a little harder to explain.
Here's what we know. We know so far. We know that there are these indications in the sky, these trails. Those are obviously real. They're clearly not condensation. Okay. Your average city bus or diesel truck does not have, 50-mile long trail of condensation, even on the coldest day. So, come on now. And not all planes do leave these trails. So we know that that's demonstrably true. We know from what you just said that soil samples indicate huge amounts of coal fly ash residue,
rainwater soil.
Right, rainwater soil, yeah. Exactly. So there's that. Let's fill in a couple other holes in this. Why it costs a lot of money to do something like this? What's the stated objective? Leaving aside what the actual objective may be, someone has to pay billions of dollars to do something like this. This product has to be moved from the coal-fired power plants to airports, loaded onto planes, pilot has to fly the plane. There's a lot involved in this. What's the rationale, the publicly stated rationale for it? Why are we doing this?
Well, first of all, the whole thing is secret. It's not admitted to. But right. I think what you're getting at, the excuse given as to why we might do something like this is to save us from global warming, which is their all-purpose.
Of course. I think the whole thing is obviously not what they say it is. But this is climate mitigation. This is part of our fight against climate change. That's the rationale.
Well, they can hide a lot of funding for it using that rationale in the overt military budget, right? You just say we're doing climate research.
Well, and the Pentagon has said repeatedly, tons of generals have said on camera, the biggest threat we face is climate change.
Yeah, there was a 2014 report, Climate Mitigation Roadmap, by the Department of Defense, and I believe there's been many other similar type of reports where they say, this is a problem for the military.
The military's fighting climate change.
Global warming, yeah.
Yeah.
So there it goes.
So the rest of us kind of made fun of it and said, the military's getting so soft. What about China? We laughed at them for falling for this liberal nonsense. But actually, when they say something like that, it's $1 trillion agency. It suggests that there are programs backing it up. They're not just saying this at a press conference. They're spending money on it.
Yeah, I call it government speak.
Government speak. Yeah. Well, you spent a lot of time reading government speak.
Too much.
So is there, just walk us through the theory of how spraying coal fly ash into the lower atmosphere mitigates climate change.
It doesn't. It makes it worse. Yeah.
But what's their justification? If you were in charge of this program, how would you justify it? What would you say? What lies would you tell?
Well, their explanations for everything are so muddled that it's kind of impossible to, explain what it is they're even talking about. Because when you spray stuff in the atmosphere, it does more to hold heat in than dissipate heat. This is kind of basic atmospheric physics. So, I mean, it's just all BS.
When you spray coal fly ash into the lower atmosphere, do you create clouds?
Yes. It creates a cloud layer of this particulate material. And, once they have these atmospheric saturations of this material, then they're hitting it with electromagnetic energy from a few different sources. And in this way, they can modify and control the weather.
So what happens when you create a cloud layer using coal fly ash and then you hit it with electromagnetic energy, which is beamed up, sent up by a kind of laser, or how does that work?
The electromagnetic energy sources apparently are generally three different ways. One is from ionospheric heaters, such as the HAARP facility in Alaska, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project. There's about 20 or 30 of those around the world. HAARP is one of the most powerful ones, but not the most powerful one. But then there's also local electromagnetic energy generators that are part of the NEXRAD system. I believe this is also referred to as Doppler radar. This is what they refer to it on TV, but technically it's called the NEXRAD system. And my science advisor assures me that these devices can also emit electromagnetic energy that can modify the weather. And the electromagnetic energy is also coming from satellites in outer space. Apparently, I have some documentation to that.
How does it interact with the coal fly ash in the cloud layer?
The most basic way would be to hit these particles with what's known as the resonant frequency.
Okay.
And what that does is that it makes the particles heat up. And it causes also what's known as the Welsbach effect, which is the same effect that you see in the mantle of a gas lantern.
Yes.
Where there's a flame below and the mantle is illuminated not because it's soaked in gas, but because the particles that comprise the mantle are resonating with each other.
Yes.
And causing the particles next to them to illuminate. And this is the same effect that we have going on in the sky above us. There's a patent called Welsbach seeding for the control of global warming or something like that, and it's a famous patent in our sphere of chemtrails and geoengineering. And when you do that, you create a high pressure zone. So that's the most basic thing that we know that can be done. And there's other historical examples of doing such things on smaller scales. So we are sure that can be accomplished, creating a high pressure zone. But, the other details of it, across the board, pretty much, are not known to us. The details of how they operate. We're still chipping away and trying to find these things and hoping that we're going to dislodge huge boulders very soon with your help about how all the details of how they're going about doing this. Like I say, there's details to some of this in the HAARP patents as well, 12 of them that came out around the same time that the HAARP antenna went into operation in, I think it was around 1990. So they had to get that up and running before they started the domestic spraying operations in the mid-1990s. But it's the evidence is overwhelming that you can use electromagnetic energy to modify the weather. And I have scores of examples of very powerful, very knowledgeable people speaking to that effect in my book.
So if I were, working, newspaper reporter, and I was on this story, the first thing I would do is I would call someone at DARPA or any of the weather agencies or the Pentagon, and I would say, are you aware of anybody, private or public entity in the United States, spraying effectively coal fly ash into the lower atmosphere?
Oh, they'll absolutely deny it. Absolutely.
This question has been asked.
Oh, yeah, many, many times. And most applicable organizations, most applicable government organizations have issued statements to the effect that, no, this is not happening. Whoever says it is a crazy conspiracy theorist.
So what's their explanation for the trails that we see in the sky?
Oh, they just say they're just condensation trails. Don't worry about it, when they're obviously not.
Is there any evidence, or are there any photographs, for example, of any of this taking place before the 1990s?
Well, they have been spraying us with whatever they want, whenever they want, pretty much ever since World War II. And then there are disinformation artists out there that post a lot of pictures of things like B-52 bombers with long trails coming out from behind them. But Dane has come up with the information that these B-52 bombers that the trolls so often like to talk about actually had water injection cooling systems on them, that when these systems were activated to cool the engines with some kind of water spray, that they would emit a lot longer trails that would eventually dissipate, but would be longer lasting. So you can, crop a photo to make it look like the trail is going to be extending indefinitely when it really just stopped like right after the edge of the photo and things like that. There's been a very well-oiled disinformation campaign against all of this. And, hey, if you're mass murdering humanity and all life on this planet, you probably might want to cover that up,
Has anyone ever come forward to say, I was flying a plane that was emitting some kind of particulate spray?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's observed like all the time. I mean, on the plane ride over here, I saw a plane going in the opposite direction, spraying a chemtrail.
A commercial plane?
Yeah. It was in one of the lanes, it was going the opposite direction in the same lane that we were in. And, it just goes on. I mean, everybody sees it.
Wait, so if a commercial airliner is doing this, that would mean that the, United, American, whatever, the commercial airlines are involved in this.
They're involved, but they don't even necessarily need to know about it. This is a highly compartmentalized program, just like the original Manhattan Project. People didn't know about it until the bombs went off because it was compartmentalized. If you didn't need to know, then you didn't know. These systems can be installed on commercial airliners just by the Department of Homeland Security telling the managers of these companies, saying, hey, it's a matter of national security. You don't need to know about it. We need that plane grounded over here at this facility for a couple weeks to a month or something like that. And then they're going to say, yes, sir. All these airline makers like Boeing and whatnot, they're big military contractors. When the government tells you to do something, they do it unequivocally. That's their big gravy train. These are, military, they provide this is one of their mainstays
their contract
of their business.
To the Pentagon.
Yeah.
All of them.
So they're going to do what they're told when the Department of Defense, as represented by the Department of Homeland Security, tells them to do something, they're going to do it.
Has anyone involved in these programs, a whistleblower, ever come forward to talk about it?
Yes, we have 2 Air Force generals. One is a brigadier general, and the other one is a different type of general, but they're both from the Air Force. One is named Richard Rolig. The other one is named Charles Jones. And they're in my book, and these were whistleblowers that came forward to Dane Wigington. There were articles written about it on geoengineeringwatch.org. There's been plenty of commercial
What did
pilots.
they say?
They said we're being sprayed. They don't have, like I said, they don't have knowledge of the details of it, but they're just acknowledging that, yes, these emissions from jet aircraft are particulate matter, and this is a big problem. And, there's very few people, I think, who have direct knowledge of the big picture, if at all at this time. Like I say, it might be a completely autonomous program at this time with just AI running the whole thing. And I have at least one patent in my book about ground handling apparatus that can automate the whole process of a plane coming in and being serviced, giving it whatever you need to get it back up in the air again. That whole thing can be completely automated and compartmentalized. The powering of the planes might even be done with these ionospheric heaters, which can generate huge amounts of wireless power. The wireless power is a known thing. I mean, you can set your iPhone down on a little pad and have it charged, right? Well, that's wireless power. But it's a lot more extensive than that. And there's a whole history of this going back to Raytheon in the 1960s. There was a scientist by the name of, last name was Brown, and he developed a helicopter that was remotely powered that stayed aloft for like 10,000 hours and stuff like that. Von Braun, the former Nazi scientist who went to work for America, he was aware of these kind of technologies. I have documentation of that. There was a SHARP airplane. That was an acronym. I'm not sure what it stands for, SHARP, in the 1980s that was remotely powered. And then in the HARP patents, there's also an example of remotely powering of aircraft from an ionospheric heater. So this would be of great logistical advantage to what I call the New Manhattan Project, because if you can remotely power these airplanes, well, then they don't need to be grounded all that much. It's hard to expose something that's going on in 40,000 feet above your head. And it would also make room in the plane for more chemtrail spray, as opposed to, you wouldn't have to have all the fuel in there. You could put chemtrail spray in there instead. So, I think what we're looking at this point is a highly advanced project. And when I'm talking about quantum AI running the whole thing, maybe it was turned over. Maybe this whole ongoing operation, and this is just pure speculation, but maybe at some point this whole operation was turned over to quantum AI, and then just everybody else who had knowledge of it before it was turned over to quantum AI, you just rub all those people out.
Well, that's pretty far. Now
Yeah.
you're tripping my meter here.
That's pure speculation. This is my latest thinking on this.
Okay.
I'm being loyal to my audience.
Listen, I mean, I'm an open-minded person, but I just I want to understand the motive here, because clearly some of what you're saying is totally plausible. I mean, some of it's just flat out proved that weather modification is 80 years standing in the United States.
Yeah.
Well, of course, every civilization is trying to modify the weather.
Goes back to ancient history.
Of course, because the weather is essential to life. So
does geophysical warfare. Goes back into ancient history.
Really?
Yeah. There's examples of Persians and as well as Mongols causing the levels of rivers to rise or fall to their strategic advantage.
Sure.
To enter walled cities. The people of Novgorod, is that the name of the city?
Yes.
In Russia. They were known as great hydrological engineers that could use that type of activity to their strategic advantage. No,
of course. Well, man has always tried to control his environment, right?
Yes.
But I just want to get to, so I'm not, there's clearly something here. I believe that. But what I don't get is you're describing an enormous amount of human activity, an enormous expense, enormous levels of complexity, complex science brought to bear in the service of that complexity. Like, it's a big project. It's the Second Manhattan Project. You've described it that way.
It's so huge, I can barely wrap my brain around it.
So without getting into speculation, what do the documents that you have read suggest the real motive is here?
Well, there's a multitude of things. Something this big is going to have a whole bunch of different reasons why. And, it's always been a military project, so the geophysical warfare is prominent in all of this. And then there's also the domestic distribution of atmospheric water that plays into a whole bunch of different things. Cities require water. Water is often required for the generation of hydroelectric power. This is why a lot of power companies have been involved in what I call conventional cloud seeding with the use of silver iodide. You can do it very cost effectively with a ground-based silver iodide generator. You put that in the path, you put that upwind of mountains where there's like a reservoir on the other side of the mountains that has a dam holding it up that generates hydroelectric power, and you can have those silver iodide particles go up and cause more precipitation.
Like fired up with rockets or something?
No, it's just a generator that's on the ground. It might be 10 feet off the ground. You just fire it up. It starts generating those little particles, and the particles are blown up the face of the mountains, such as the Sierra Nevada mountains. And as they get up to the peak of the mountains, they will cause more precipitation than if they weren't there. And it will cause more snow to form or more precipitation to form on the other side of the mountain where the reservoir is that's holding back the water that is used for hydroelectric power.
That's clever.
Yeah, the cost benefit ratios have been like 20-1 on things like that. There's plenty of examples of that. PG&E was, they loved it. Same with
Pacific Gas and Electric.
Pacific Gas and
Big
Electric.
California utility.
Southern California Edison as well has been doing that.
And is that confirmed?
Oh yeah, this is in their own words, and there's been plenty of studies on that. And so you need that water for agriculture. I mean, that's pretty obvious. You need certain amounts of water at certain times to produce peak agriculture, peak production of food and things.
Can I ask a stupid question? So you're talking about, you're not talking about, you're describing a confirmed series of interventions into the natural atmospheric cycle. Like, we know this is happening because they admit it, they talk about it. In all of your reading, did anyone ever say, hey, wait a second, there could be unintended consequences to this?
That you're talking about the ecological impacts?
Yeah, unforeseen downsides. Like, I don't know, we're messing in, an ancient natural order that we don't really understand. Like, maybe there's going to be part of this that we don't want. It's
all been obfuscated, just like it's been obfuscated for this, what I call the New Manhattan Project. If you look back at the conventional cloud seeding industry and all the papers that have been written about that, if you look back in the history of weather modification, mostly what you're looking at is the conventional cloud seeding industry. You get little glimpses of the New Manhattan Project, the use of electromagnetic energy, but those are kind of few and far between. You got to really dig those out. But most of it is about the conventional cloud seeding industry. And you can read a stack of documents a yard high and not see one instance where they actually address the toxicity of the substances that are being sprayed. I was only able to find one report that actually addresses the toxicity. What they're usually talking about are ancillary effects of this, like, oh, you're going to get more rain over here, so that's going to, cause the animals to go where the rain is, and, they're going to not be where the rain isn't, and, there's going to be migrations, and plants, might wither over here because of the distribution of the atmospheric water. That's usually what they go on about. But the most obvious thing is, hey, is this stuff you're spraying us with toxic? So, of course, they ignore that question, except for one document that I found, 1969 Bureau of Reclamation paper, that finally, and they note this in that paper, they say, to this date, up until the publication of this 1969 paper, they say, in the weather modification literature, there has never been a single example addressing the toxic effects of the stuff that we're spraying. They note that in that paper, and then they say, what we found is that this is highly toxic to specifically fish. They have sticklebacks. They did a study on there, and they show the toxicity of silver iodide to sticklebacks, and then also to microorganisms. They say that it's even more toxic to these microorganisms, which are the building blocks of the natural cycle. It's the stuff that the fish and the insects feed on, little bacterias and things like that. So yeah, they've been obfuscating the health effects of all this, and the geoengineers of today have been consistently doing the same thing as well.
Why?
They don't want you to know. I mean, this is the elephant in the room. I mean, that you can just look around. Like I said, I've never seen so many dead trees. But that's climate change. Well, they're changing it. The whole thing and how that plays into all of this is just so diabolically twisted that it's really hard to explain, because in many cases there is warming happening, but it's only because they're spraying us with these particulates. It's not because of atmospheric CO2. Atmospheric CO2 is not a problem at all. But they may be causing other bad things to happen. I'm starting to understand why Dane talks about this. I've been kind of like, forget about the whole thing. It's all a bunch of load of baloney. But they may be causing some kind of warming that could cause a catastrophe. I mean, they are causing the warming, and this could possibly cause some kind of other catastrophe involving the release of methane in the Siberian traps, which is something that Dane has been talking about extensively. They are causing...
Well, I happen to know this just randomly, but, measurement of atmospheric gases in Siberia was put on hold, or the reading of the measurements was put on hold for a couple of years because of the war in Ukraine. But recently, within the last 12 months, those measurements have been assessed by scientists in Russia, and there has been a massive, massive increase. I'm getting this pretty directly, in methane emissions from Siberia, which is, of course, look, there are a lot of permafrost beneath which is organic matter that's been sitting there for a while. It decays and releases methane, and there has been a big increase in that. So that's the one data point I can add to this.
The problem is not atmospheric carbon dioxide. The problem is the tens of thousands of megatons of toxic materials that they're spraying on us. And it also partially of the problem is industrial pollution from countries like China that just billow this stuff out into the atmosphere at just amazing amounts.
Are other countries doing this as well, spraying weird things into the lower atmosphere? Mostly
Western countries, although second world countries such as China and Brazil are probably involved as well. It's just like the more industrialization you have in your country, the more chemtrails you're going to see. And this is largely due to other motives, financial motives, such as the weather derivatives market and the catastrophe reinsurance market. But the weather derivatives market is a very pertinent example, because this is a market that rises and falls with the weather. It's mostly based on temperature, but that you can place bets on any type of geophysical condition in the weather derivatives market, such as precipitation or stream flow or wind.
You can bet on the weather in a publicly traded market?
Yeah, it's called the weather derivatives market, and it went through the roof recently in 2023.
Wait. Why have I never heard of that? There's something so... I just want to blow it up for the crime of existing. I don't know why I feel that way.
They have
so
a water futures market on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange now, too. That started in, I think, 2020.
But, okay, one catastrophe at a time. And I don't even know why I feel it's a catastrophe, but I do instinctively think that a weather derivatives market is a bad thing. How long has that been around? Where is it? Where do I find it if I want to look at it?
Well, it started with Enron in the late 1990s. They are the originators of today's weather derivatives market, and they after Enron went bankrupt, it was bought by UBS Warburg, the Enron weather derivatives trading desk. So the core of it today apparently resides with UBS Warburg, and we all know how corrupt the whole Enron thing is. So I go on at length about the things that they were doing. I've read extensively about them, but I mean, don't put anything past Enron.
So it sounds, okay, so, I mean, most of us consider weather like a function of nature, which is beyond human control. But clearly, if there's a weather derivatives market.
Yeah, if you have foreknowledge of the weather, if you know what the operations are going to be happening over the next days or weeks or whatever, you can make a killing in the weather derivatives market. And this market peaked in 2023 at $25 billion. It went through the roof. It's come down a little bit since then, but there was an explosion between, I think it was 2020 and 2023, or maybe 2019, where it did like a 12x for some reason. Did it like 12 times.
Volume of trading.
Yeah, well, overall market value, which is contract value. If you add up all the value of all the contracts on the market at the time.
That's the craziest thing I've heard in a long time. I'm not even sure what to make of it. But I guess the first, my most obvious conclusion is the phrase acts of God which is what we refer to, unwelcome weather events as. It's an act of God.
Yeah.
May not really be acts of God.
Right. An act of the former Manhattan Project scientists, the new gods. But the other market is the catastrophe reinsurance market, and this is known as the disaster capitalism market. And this is a market that you can make a lot of money on if you have foreknowledge of catastrophic weather, such as earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, and things like that. This is a much bigger market than the weather derivatives market. I think it's a $250 billion market last time I checked.
Okay, so obviously there's a lot here. This is a much bigger topic than I realized. It began with like, hey, what are those lines in the sky? And now what you're saying, and the part that I believe, like, I don't know what to make of a lot of what you said. I just want to say that because I don't know anything about it. But one thing you've already convinced me of an hour in is that there is a lot of money going into manipulating the weather. It's not just cloud seeding.
Right. Yeah.
So I totally believe that. If there's a weather derivatives market, then we know that there's a lot more here that is never discussed at all. And people like CNN are kind of going out of their way to make sure you don't discuss it. I'm not quite sure why. Why do they care?
They're always covering up for the establishment.
They are. No, you're absolutely right. It's a weird impulse.
It's their cover-up operation, the mainstream.
Where they work for the government? Like, why do they have to make excuses?
In essence, yes.
Yeah, well, clearly. Okay, so that's what you've convinced me of so far. You made reference twice to earthquakes. That seems like the one of these that's not like the other. So I understand how you might affect weather by affecting precipitation in the lower atmosphere. That makes intuitive sense to me. Earthquakes are, as far as I know, the product of pressure buildup between tectonic plates.
Yes.
I grew up on an earthquake fault called the Rose Canyon Fault, and that's what we were told as kids. We had a ton of earthquakes.
True.
Right, in California. So I don't know how that's related.
It's the ionospheric heaters that can do that. We have evidence of the ionosphere being heated right before the Honshu earthquake that caused the Fukushima nuclear disaster. The Honshu earthquake caused a tidal wave which hit the Fukushima
I remember
nuclear reactors in 2011, and we have hard scientific data of the ionosphere above the area where the earthquake happened being manipulated right before it, leading into it. Now, what they're doing is they're bouncing electromagnetic energy off of the ionosphere or shooting it up into the ionosphere to manipulate the ionosphere in such a fashion to achieve their strategic goals.
Okay, but the ionosphere is just part of the lower atmosphere.
Part of the upper atmosphere.
Upper atmosphere.
Yeah.
How high is the ionosphere?
I can't give you a number, but it goes troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, ionosphere.
Okay.
So it's pretty far out there. It's
my ignorance on display once again.
Well,
So how? But that's as they would say in New England, wicked far from the Earth.
Yes.
Okay. So how would changes that high in the sky affect the tectonic plates that produce earthquakes?
Let's say you just bounce powerful electromagnetic energy off of the ionosphere down onto the earthquake fault.
Oh.
And cause the land there to rupture, because it's known that these types of high-powered magnetic energy beams can destroy all kinds of stuff. There's extensive documentation as to the military advantages of doing these kinds of things. You can just obliterate enemies.
Yeah, no, I have a grade school classmate who works on this, on this area, but I wasn't aware that they could cause earthquakes.
This is, I'm not sure if it's outlined in the HARP patents, but there's quite a few prominent geophysical engineers, people involved in geophysical warfare who have written and spoken about this. Most prominently would be Gordon J.F. MacDonald in his 1968 paper, How to Wreck the Environment, which appeared in a book called Unless Peace Comes in 1968. And he specifically writes about using electromagnetic energy or I'm not sure if he specifies electromagnetic energy, but he says we have the capability to produce earthquakes, specifically, I believe, more than once in this paper, among a whole bunch of other crazy things that he talks about that were, completely people were not thinking about this at all in 1968. He also talks about mind control, which can be accomplished through the use of electromagnetic energy. There's extensive documentation of that as well.
Yeah. Well, it's 2025, and I'm not thinking about any of this stuff either. So I give him a pass. I'm not thinking about it, 57 years ago.
It's been hidden. It's been very well hidden until now.
So now to the question, well, let me just say a couple other questions. The legality of it. So you said that you don't believe it's just government entities spraying this stuff. Is that illegal? Can I take a Cessna up and just spray stuff over the United States?
No, it violates a raft of laws, most notably federal law that's based on the Nuremberg Code. But these people conduct themselves in a fashion that they just figure they're above the law. They've just been spraying us with whatever they want, whenever they want, ever since the end of World War II. We have hundreds of examples of chemical and biological agents being sprayed upon American populations without their knowledge or consent. Probably the most pertinent one that I have in the book involved a former Nazi scientist who worked with some American scientists to spray anthrax out of a plane. This was, I believe, the CIA. Yeah, there was CIA guys. There was a CIA project. That's at the end of the chapter, the Nazis and the CIA.
Yeah, it didn't work.
Well, yeah, but this is you can look to a couple of other books that were not written by me. One called In the Name of Science by Andrew Golichek, as well as Clouds of Secrecy by Dr. Leonard A. Cole. And if you read both of those books, you'll understand that there has been hundreds of these types of examples. People make a lot of certain examples of this, such as Operation Sea Spray, where they released biological weapons out of ships off the coast of San Francisco. And that's probably the most famous, well-known example of this. But I think the most pertinent examples are the ones having to do with stuff being sprayed from planes. And there's really only a handful of examples of those. But just the fact that we have, hundreds of examples of these types of very harmful materials being released upon an unsuspecting American public domestically, I mean, that is just so beyond the pale bad that it's just, it's hard for people to come to grips with the fact that this is actually going on,
Has anybody ever, other than the two Air Force generals you referred to, has anyone ever come forward to say, yeah, I've seen this firsthand, but...
Well, we've all seen it firsthand.
Been involved in this effort directly?
There's been a lot of pilots, a lot of other commercial pilots that have come forward. There's been...
What do they say?
They say, yeah, planes are emitting the sprays. There's been quite a few examples of that.
Commercial pilots, like some guy who works for Frontier Airlines.
Yeah, usually they're retired because, they don't have to deal with the fallout of it. We have a whistleblower from the EPA. He came forward to Dane Wigington, who says that pretty much everybody at the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, knows damn well that this is all going on, but they just, want to protect their little way of life and their little paycheck. And
well, the problem with the climate theology is that it makes people obedient. And because it creates this impression that whatever bad is happening, clear cutting of forests, building offshore wind farms, killing whales, whatever it is, destroying the population of the California condor, all the downsides of climate mitigation are worth it because this is an unprecedented crisis that we have to fight.
The existential threat is not atmospheric CO2.
No, of course I know that. I'm just saying
threat is the
it's a way of
room.
getting everyone to go along with something horrible because it's in the service of a greater good.
Yeah. I mean, it's an all-purpose control method. If pretty much any time the establishment wants you to do something and they don't have a really good reason for telling you this, they just say, well, climate change.
Yeah. So if you were, okay, so I'm coming with this cold, so I'm sympathetic to the viewer who's saying, what the hell am I listening to right now? So you became convinced of the views you've just outlined for us on the basis of reading. So can you give people who've made it this far a list of things that they should read to help them understand what is happening.
Chemtrails Exposed, the New Manhattan Project, published by Skyhorse Publishing, January 2025.
Soon forthcoming.
Yeah, so that's the compilation. See, it's been the stuff that's been publicly. It's hard to point to one document other than my book, seriously, because it's been released to the public piecemeal. It's all in these little tidbits of information over here in this document, over there, and over there. And I thank God that I have a brain that functioned enough to allow me to put all these different pieces of the puzzle together to form a cohesive whole, so you can look at everything and see what this actually is. Because, most of the media, mainstream media, they're doing everything they can to disassemble the puzzle and to keep it fragmented. It seems
like it'd be a straightforward FOIA process. Like, what? And by the way, there's no reason that the U.S. government at any level, whether it's DOD or EPA or DARPA or whatever, any government agency should keep secret its efforts at climate mitigation. Like, that's not.
If it was beneficial, you'd think that there would be a transparent process.
Well, right. And you could say that about everything. I mean, everything that's 99% of things that are classified are not classified to protect you.
Black budgets began with the original Manhattan Project.
Of course. So, no, I get it. Trust me, I'm with you on that. I'm just saying in this case, it's hard just logically to accept the national security justification for keeping it secret. Like, why does it jeopardize our national security for me to know what we're doing with my money to mitigate climate change? Like, why would you keep that secret? Like, I don't get it.
It's all a cover up.
Well, I get that, but I don't know why it's that hard to take a member of Congress and just say, why don't you get to the bottom of this?
Well, they don't want to. It's the same thing.
Is the U.S. government spraying anything into the atmosphere? Anything, any chemical of any kind that ultimately winds up on the earth, in the soil, in the water?
They deny it. We have evidence of it, and they deny it, and that's where we're at. It's like a Mexican standoff, I guess, at this point. But I thank God that you're having me on your show today, because I feel like with this interview we can force the issue, and it's a great honor and a great responsibility. I look to people that I work with, such as Marvin Herndon and Dane Wigington, and my science advisor, and Dr. Mark Whiteside. And, it's just amazing to me that I'm the guy that comes on the Tucker Carlson show to say this.
Well, I've always been interested. And when I saw that CNN was telling me chemtrails aren't real, but we need them, I'm a sub-genius. But even I was like, really? That doesn't make any sense. And having worked at CNN for 10 years, I know that their instinct is always to cover up everything except the things that their masters tell them to expose. So I know that because I worked there.
I saw you in a recent interview where you were talking about the corruption of journalism. I think you were talking, I forget who you were talking to, but I've been watching a lot of your interviews recently. And you said that when you started waking up and started realizing what was going on here, you realized that it wasn't just a few corrupt journalists. It wasn't even a majority of journalists. It was all of them.
Yeah, knowingly or unknowingly, but their instinct is all the same,
exactly.
Which is to kowtow before power. There are very few strong people, very few independent-minded people.
Yeah.
Very few non-obedient people. I mean, you don't have to be that smart.
Yeah, it's kind of smart. It's kind of understandable. Most people don't, the way I put it is, most people don't live their lives abstractly.
Right.
Most people don't look at life and say like, hey, I'm a powerful individual and I can go about living my life however I want. And, in the long term, I believe I'm going to be successful, whether it, ruffles feathers and I got to do all kinds of stuff that I don't want to do to get to that point, then, that's what I'll do. Most people are just like, hey, I went to college. I got this degree. Look, I have this little piece of paper that shows that I'm an important person. And then I go here and they're doing this and all these other people, they're all doing the same thing. So, I'm the important person. I'm part of this and I will be provided for. That's how their brain works.
Yes.
the psychology of it is just amazing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they're making a big mistake because lying gets you nowhere. Peter, thank you for spending this time. I'm motivated to learn more.
Well, Skyhorse Publishing, 2025, Chemtrails Exposed, the New Manhattan Project. My website is peterакirby.com. You can see everything I'm doing there. I have a show on Rumble called The Abstract, and I also have a Truth Social channel by that name, The Abstract.
Thank you.